Ethan Caldwell wasn't your average billionaire. At 45, he had climbed to the top of the world in ways most people could only dream of. His tech empire was massive, touching millions of lives with its products and services. He was known for being sharp, focused, and relentless. Some called him a genius, others whispered that he was cold and unapproachable. But no matter how you looked at it, Ethan was a man who seemed untouchable. For 30 long years, Ethan avoided love like it was something dangerous. To him, relationships were messy, unpredictable, and above all, distracting. In his mind, there was no room for romance when he was busy building an empire. Sure, women came into his life, beautiful, smart, and ambitious ones, but none stayed for long. They either got tired of his endless work hours or felt suffocated by the walls he built around himself. And honestly, Ethan didn't care. Love wasn't something he needed, or so he thought. His days were filled with boardroom meetings, strategy calls, and late-night brainstorming sessions. Coffee became his constant companion, and sleep was often sacrificed for deadlines. On the surface, Ethan appeared to have it all: money, power, respect. But deep down, he carried a loneliness that not even his success could fix. The truth was, Ethan's life felt empty. There was no one waiting for him at home, no laughter filling the silence of his penthouse apartment, just him and his thoughts. One Friday evening, after another exhausting week, Ethan decided to break his routine. Instead of heading straight back to his apartment, he found himself walking into a small, dimly lit bar on the outskirts of downtown. It wasn't the kind of place he usually frequented. This wasn't some fancy rooftop lounge with champagne flutes and designer suits. No, this place was different. Called the Rusty Anchor, it smelled faintly of wood polish and spilled beer, with neon signs flickering against cracked walls. Something about it intrigued Ethan, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. As he stepped inside, the noise hit him first. The low hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. The air was warm, almost comforting compared to the sterile environment of his office. He scanned the room, taking in the mismatched furniture and the cozy vibe. Then, his eyes landed on her. She was behind the bar, moving with ease as she served drinks to customers. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled even under the dull lighting. She wore jeans and a simple tank top, nothing flashy, but there was something magnetic about her. Maybe it was the way she smiled genuinely at everyone, treating each customer like they mattered. Or maybe it was the quiet confidence she exuded, despite working in such an ordinary setting. Whatever it was, Ethan couldn't look away. Eventually, she noticed him sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Most people would have ignored a stranger, especially someone who looked as intimidating as Ethan did, but not her. She walked over, wiping her hands on a towel before leaning slightly forward. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly. "Scotch." "Neat," Ethan replied, barely glancing up from his phone. He expected her to leave after pouring his drink, but instead she lingered. "You don't come here often, do you?" she said, more of a statement than a question. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Does it show?" She chuckled softly. "Kind of. You've got that I don't really belong here but I'm trying look." He smirked despite himself. "And what does that mean?" "It means you're probably used to fancier places," she said with a shrug. "But hey, we might surprise you." They started talking, small talk at first about the weather, the weird neon sign outside, and how long she'd worked at the bar. As the conversation went on, Ethan found himself opening up more than he intended. He told her about his grueling work schedule, his lack of free time, and the weight of running a company. For once, he didn't feel the need to impress anyone. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking questions that made him think deeper. By the time the bar started closing, Ethan realized he hadn't spoken so freely in years. This woman, this complete stranger, had somehow managed to make him feel human again. When she finally said goodnight, he felt a strange pang of reluctance. Who was she? And why did he suddenly want to know more? Little did Ethan know this chance encounter was just the beginning. That night, as he walked back to his car through the drizzling rain, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted. For the first time in decades, he felt curious. Not about markets or profits, but about a person. A bar waitress with auburn hair and a smile that reached her eyes. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Ethan, though not in the way he was used to. Normally, his life moved at breakneck speed, board meetings, conference calls, and endless emails dictating every second of his day. But now, something new had entered the rhythm of his life. Fridays at the Rusty Anchor. Without even realizing it, Ethan had started marking his calendar for these nights, counting down the hours until he could step into that cozy little bar again. Each time he walked, through the door she was there, the waitress with the auburn hair and green eyes, always moving behind the bar with the same effortless grace. Her name was Clara, he learned early on, though he didn't need to be told twice. It suited her. Simple, yet striking. Just like her presence. Every Friday they'd talk. At first, their conversation stayed light, skimming over topics like favorite foods or childhood memories. But as the weeks went by, they began diving deeper, peeling back layers neither of them had shown to anyone else. Clara wasn't intimidated by Ethan's wealth or reputation. In fact, she seemed almost amused by it. "You act like you're some untouchable CEO," she teased him one night, pouring him another glass of scotch. "But really, you're just a guy who works too much and doesn't know how to relax." Ethan chuckled, but there was truth in her words. He was a guy who worked too much. For years, he'd convinced himself that his job defined him, that the numbers on a balance sheet were more important than anything else. But sitting there with Clara, listening to her stories about growing up in a small town, helping raise her younger siblings after their parents passed away, he started questioning everything. How had he let his life become so narrow? Why had he pushed people away instead of letting them in? Clara shared bits of her world with him freely. She told him about working odd jobs to make ends meet, about juggling school while taking care of her siblings, and about the dreams she still held on to despite all the challenges. She wanted to open her own cafe someday, a place where people could feel welcome and comfortable like the Rusty Anchor. Hearing her talk about her aspirations filled Ethan with a kind of admiration he hadn't felt in years. Here was someone who had faced real struggles, yet she carried herself with strength and optimism. In return, Ethan opened up too. Not because he felt obligated, but because Clara made it easy. She asked thoughtful questions, listened without judgment, and never once tried to impress him. Slowly, pieces of his past began spilling out. The strained relationship with his family, the loneliness that followed him wherever he went, the fear of failure that drove him to work harder and harder. Talking to her felt like releasing a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying. One night, as the bar grew quieter and the crowd thinned out, Clara leaned against the counter and looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to slow down?" she asked. "To stop chasing the next big thing and just live?" Ethan hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before, or if they had, he hadn't listened. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I've spent my whole life running toward something. I'm not sure I'd know how to stop." Clara smiled softly. "Maybe you don't have to stop completely. Just take a detour every now and then. See where it leads." Her words stuck with him long after he left the bar that night. As he drove home through the quiet streets, he found himself replaying their conversation in his head. What would it be like to slow down? To focus less on achievements and more on moments? For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life, one that wasn't ruled by deadlines and profit margins. And at the center of that imagined life was Clara. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened. Ethan found himself craving not just the bar itself, but the connection he felt when he was with Clara. She challenged him in ways no one else ever had. When he mentioned an upcoming business trip to Europe, she playfully suggested he take a weekend off to explore Paris instead of holing up in hotel rooms reviewing spreadsheets. "You've seen enough boardrooms," she said. "Go see the Eiffel." tower, eat croissants, live a little. At first, Ethan laughed it off, but later, alone in his office, he found himself researching train routes from Brussels to Paris. Could he really do it? Could he step away from work, even for a couple of days, and simply enjoy himself? The idea terrified him, but also excited him in a way he couldn't ignore. Then came the night that changed everything. Snow had begun falling outside, blanketing the city in a soft, white glow. The bar was nearly empty, save for a few regulars nursing their drinks. Ethan sat at his usual spot, sipping scotch as Clara wiped down the counters. There was a calmness between them, a quiet understanding that didn't require words. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Clara," he said, his voice low but steady. "I think I'm falling for you." She froze for a moment, her hands pausing mid-motion. Then she turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, Ethan feared he'd misread everything, that maybe she didn't feel the same way. But then she smiled, a slow, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "I think I'm falling for you too," she said softly. "But Ethan, this isn't going to be easy. Your world, it's so different from mine." He nodded, knowing she was right. Their lives couldn't be more opposite, his filled with luxury and privilege, hers marked by hard work and sacrifice. Yet somehow, none of that mattered when they were together. All that mattered was the connection they shared, raw and real and unshakable. "Then we'll figure it out," Ethan said firmly. "Together." Clara studied him for a long moment, searching his eyes for any hint of doubt. Finding none, she reached across the counter and took his hand in hers. "Okay," she said simply. "Let's figure it out." As they sat there, fingers intertwined, the snow continued to fall outside. Neither of them knew what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something to avoid after all. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's life began to shift in ways he never imagined. For years, his days had been predictable. Wake up early, work until late, repeat. But now, there was a new rhythm, one that felt foreign, yet exhilarating. It wasn't just about showing up at the Rusty Anchor every Friday anymore. Clara had started inviting him into her world, and slowly, Ethan found himself stepping out of his comfort zone. Their first outing outside the bar happened almost by accident. One Saturday afternoon, Clara mentioned she was heading to a local farmer's market to pick up fresh produce for dinner. Without thinking too much about it, Ethan surprised himself by asking if he could tag along. "Are you sure?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. "It's not exactly your usual scene." Ethan shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Maybe I'm ready for something different." The market was bustling with activity. Vendors calling out prices, kids chasing each other between stalls, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. Ethan felt completely out of place in his tailored jacket and leather shoes, but Clara didn't seem to notice. She moved effortlessly from stall to stall, chatting with vendors like old friends. At one point, she handed him a ripe peach and encouraged him to take a bite. He hesitated at first. The juice dripped down his chin as soon as he sank his teeth into the fruit. But then he laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. That day marked the beginning of many small adventures. Clara introduced Ethan to parts of the city he'd never bothered exploring before. Art galleries tucked away in quiet neighborhoods, tiny bookstores crammed with secondhand treasures, parks where families gathered on weekends. Each experience opened his eyes to a side of life he'd been missing. For so long, Ethan had measured success by numbers and achievements, but now he was learning that joy could be found in the simplest moments. A shared smile, a warm cup of coffee, the sound of laughter echoing through a crowded street. Clara also challenged him to try things he'd never considered. One evening, she convinced him to join her at a community potluck dinner hosted by a local nonprofit. "You'll love it," she promised. "It's just people coming together, sharing food and stories." Ethan balked at first. He hated large gatherings, especially ones where he didn't know anyone, but Clara insisted. Trust me, she said. You don't have to impress anyone here, just be yourself. To his surprise, Ethan enjoyed it more than he expected. He sat at a long table with strangers, passing around plates of homemade dishes while listening to their stories. A retired teacher talked about her volunteer work teaching kids to read. A young artist showed off sketches of murals she hoped to paint across the city. Ethan listened intently, asking questions and even offering advice when asked. By the end of the night, he realized he hadn't thought about work once. For the first time in years, he felt present, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. As their relationship deepened, cracks began to show. Not in their connection, but in the worlds they came from. People noticed. Word spread quickly about the billionaire CEO who kept showing up at a modest bar on the outskirts of town. Paparazzi started lurking outside the rusty anchor, snapping photos whenever Ethan walked in or out. Tabloids ran stories speculating about Clara's motives, painting her as a gold digger trying to climb the social ladder. Friends and colleagues questioned whether Ethan was making a mistake, warning him that mixing his personal life with someone so different could damage his reputation. At first, Ethan tried to ignore the noise. He told himself it didn't matter what others thought, but the pressure mounted, and eventually, it spilled over into their conversations. One night, after a particularly grueling week filled with rumors and gossip, Ethan arrived at the bar looking exhausted. Clara immediately sensed something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked gently, sliding a glass of water toward him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's getting harder to keep this, us, private. Everyone has an opinion about it. Some of my board members are concerned it might affect the company. And then there's the media." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I knew this wouldn't be easy," she said quietly. "But Ethan, we can't let other people dictate how we live our lives. If you're sure about this, then we'll find a way to handle it." Her words hit home. Ethan realized that for years he'd let external expectations shape his decisions. He'd built his empire based on what others thought he should do, never stopping to ask himself what he truly wanted. But now, sitting across from Clara, he understood that love required courage. Courage to stand up for what mattered, even when the world pushed back. Determined to prove his commitment, Ethan made a bold move. He announced plans to scale back his role at the company, delegating more responsibilities to trusted executives. It was a decision that shocked everyone around him, including himself. For decades, his identity had been tied to his job. But now he was ready to prioritize something else, Clara, and the future they were building together. Clara, for her part, remained steadfast. She refused to let public scrutiny shake her resolve. When reporters camped outside her apartment, she greeted them with polite smiles and firm boundaries. "My life is my own," she told them firmly, "and so is Ethan's." Through it all, their bond only grew stronger. They leaned on each other during the tough times, finding strength in their shared determination to make things work. Ethan learned to embrace vulnerability, allowing himself to rely on someone else for the first time in years. And Clara reminded him that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up even when things got messy. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench watching the sunset, Ethan turned to Clara and smiled. "You've changed everything," he said softly. "I didn't think I needed love, but now I can't imagine my life without it." Clara reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Good," she replied with a grin. "Because I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, surrounded by the colors of the fading sun, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. Love had knocked on his door when he least expected it, and though it had brought challenges, it had also brought light. For the first time in 30 years, Ethan finally understood what it meant to truly live. Ethan's decision to step back from his all-consuming career didn't happen overnight. It was more like a slow unraveling, a gradual letting go of the reins he'd held so tightly for decades. At first, it felt strange, almost wrong, to delegate. tasks and trust others to handle what he once insisted on doing himself. But every time doubt crept in, Clara was there, reminding him why he'd made the choice in the first place. "You're not giving up," she'd say when he seemed unsure. "You're just making room for something else, something bigger." That something bigger became clearer with each passing day. As Ethan pulled back from the constant grind of running his company, he found himself waking up with a sense of anticipation instead of dread. Instead of rushing to meetings, he started spending mornings walking through the city streets, sipping coffee from a local cafe Clara loved. The air smelled cleaner somehow, less weighed down by the pressure that used to follow him everywhere. He even began noticing little things, the way sunlight filtered through tree branches, the sound of kids laughing in a nearby playground. These moments, once invisible to him, now felt precious. But stepping away wasn't without its challenges. Some of his colleagues questioned his judgment, whispering behind closed doors about whether he was losing focus or getting too distracted by his personal life. A few board members openly expressed concern, urging him to reconsider his reduced role. "The company needs you," one of them said during a tense meeting. "This isn't the time to take a back seat." Ethan listened patiently, nodding as they spoke. When it was his turn to respond, he leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I've spent 30 years building this company," he said, "and I'll always care about its success. But if I don't make space for other parts of my life now, I might lose something even more important than profits." His words silenced the room. For the first time, Ethan wasn't speaking as the untouchable CEO who lived and breathed business strategy. He was speaking as a man who had finally realized that wealth and power meant nothing without someone to share them with. Despite the pushback, Ethan stuck to his plan. He handed over key responsibilities to trusted executives, people who had worked alongside him for years and understood his vision. Surprisingly, stepping back gave him a new perspective. Freed from the daily chaos of managing every detail, he could see the bigger picture, the long-term goals, the opportunities he'd overlooked while chasing short-term wins. It was liberating, like taking off a suit jacket after hours of wearing it too tight. Meanwhile, Clara continued to guide him into experiences that challenged his old ways of thinking. One weekend, she dragged him to a volunteer event at a community center where she often helped out. "It's just a few hours," she promised when he hesitated. "And who knows, you might actually enjoy yourself." Ethan showed up feeling awkward, dressed in jeans and a plain sweater that made him feel oddly exposed. The center buzzed with activity: kids playing basketball, families sharing meals, volunteers painting murals on the walls. At first, Ethan stood off to the side, unsure of how to fit in. But then a group of teenagers asked if he wanted to join their game. Hesitant but curious, he agreed. To his surprise, he ended up having fun. Sweat dripped down his face as he ran across the court, laughing when he missed an easy shot. The teens teased him good-naturedly, calling him old man, and cheering whenever he managed to score. By the end of the game, Ethan's cheeks hurt from smiling so much. As he sat on the sidelines catching his breath, one of the boys plopped down beside him. "You're pretty cool for a rich guy," the boy said, grinning. Ethan chuckled. "Thanks, I think." "No, seriously," the boy continued. "Most people like you wouldn't bother showing up here. But you did. That says something." Those words stayed with Ethan long after the event ended. They reminded him that actions spoke louder than titles or bank accounts. Being present mattered more than anything else. As their relationship deepened, Ethan and Clara faced another test, one that would challenge them in ways neither expected. Clara received devastating news. Her youngest sibling, Mia, had been diagnosed with a rare illness requiring expensive treatment. Overnight, Clara's world turned upside down. She spent countless hours researching doctors, treatments, and financial aid programs, all while trying to stay strong for her family. When Ethan learned what was happening, he immediately offered to help. "Let me cover the costs," he said, gently. "Please let me do this for you." Clara hesitated, torn between gratitude and pride. "I can't ask you to do that," she said finally. "This is my responsibility." "It's ours now," Ethan replied firmly. "You're not alone in this, okay? We'll figure it out together." Overwhelmed by emotion, Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. With Ethan's support, they navigated the complex medical system, ensuring Mia received the best care possible. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, sleepless nights, and moments of sheer panic, but they faced it all side by side. Through this ordeal, Ethan gained a deeper understanding of love. It wasn't just about grand gestures or romantic dates. It was about showing up when it mattered most. Whether it was holding Clara's hand during a difficult conversation with doctors or sitting quietly with her when she needed space, Ethan proved time and again that he was in this for the long haul. One evening, after a particularly tough day, at the hospital, Ethan and Clara sat together on her apartment balcony, watching the stars twinkle above the city skyline. Neither spoke for a while, content to simply be in each other's presence. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I never thought I'd say this," he admitted softly, "but I'm grateful for everything we've been through, even the hard stuff. It's taught me what really matters." Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Me too," she whispered. "We're stronger because of it." In that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of the city below, Ethan realized that love wasn't about avoiding pain or hardship. It was about facing those challenges together and coming out the other side closer than before. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alive, not because of what he owned or achieved, but because of the person beside him. And that realization changed everything. The months that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Ethan and Clara. On one hand, they grew closer than ever, their bond strengthened by the challenges they faced together. But on the other hand, life kept throwing curveballs their way, testing their resolve and forcing them to confront hard truths about themselves and their relationship. Mia's treatment became the center of their lives. Every decision, every conversation seemed to revolve around her health and recovery. Ethan threw himself into helping Clara navigate the labyrinth of medical bills, insurance claims, and specialist appointments. He used his resources wisely, not to flaunt his wealth, but to ensure Mia got the best care possible. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but neither of them complained. They knew this was what love looked like in action, standing shoulder to shoulder when life felt overwhelming. But even with Ethan's support, Clara wrestled with guilt. She had always prided herself on being independent, on handling everything, on her own. Now she found herself relying heavily on someone else, and it didn't sit well with her. One night, after another long day at the hospital, she finally voiced her fears. "I feel like I'm taking advantage of you," she confessed, sitting cross-legged on the couch while Ethan made tea in the kitchen. "All these expenses, all the time you're spending, and it's too much. You shouldn't have to deal with this." Ethan stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. His expression was calm, but firm. "Listen to me," he said, walking over and kneeling in front of her. "You're not taking advantage of me. This isn't charity. It's partnership. We're in this together, remember? That means sharing the load, good and bad." Clara looked away, tears pooling in her eyes. "But what if people say I'm using you? What if they think I only care about your money?" He reached out, gently tilting her chin so their eyes met. "Let them talk," he said softly. "Their opinions don't define us. What matters is how we treat each other. And trust me, no amount of money could buy what we have." His words broke through her defenses, and for the first time in weeks, Clara let herself fully lean on him. She realized that love wasn't about keeping score or proving independence. It was about allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to accept help when you needed it most. In that moment, she understood that Ethan wasn't just offering financial support. He was offering unconditional trust and commitment, and that meant more to her than anything else. As Mia's condition slowly improved, thanks to the treatments and surgeries, Ethan and Clara began to find pockets of joy amidst the chaos. They started carving out small moments for themselves, simple pleasures that reminded them why they were fighting so hard. Sometimes, it was as easy as ordering takeout and watching an old movie on the couch. Other times, it was sneaking away for a quiet walk under the stars, holding hands and talking about nothing in particular. These little escapes gave them strength, a reminder that life wasn't just about surviving. It was also about living. One evening, after a particularly hopeful doctor's visit, Ethan surprised Clara with tickets to a weekend getaway. "We need a break," he told her, handing her the envelope with a mischievous grin. "Just you and me. No hospitals, no stress, just us." Clara opened the envelope and gasped. Inside were train tickets to a cozy cabin nestled in the mountains. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you serious? When did you plan this?" "Does it matter?" he teased, pulling her into a hug. "Say yes, please." How could she say no? The thought of escaping the noise and pressure of the city, even just for a few days, was irresistible. So early the next morning, they packed light bags and boarded the train, leaving behind the weight of their responsibilities. The ride itself was peaceful, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels soothing as they gazed out at the passing scenery. By the time they arrived at the cabin, surrounded by towering trees and crisp mountain air, Clara felt like a different person, lighter, freer. For 2 days, they disconnected from the outside world. No phones, no emails, no reminders of the struggles waiting for them back home. Instead, they hiked trails lined with wildflowers, cooked meals together in the tiny kitchen, and spent hours talking by the fireplace. For the first time in months, they laughed until their sides hurt, sharing silly stories and inside jokes that only they understood. It was exactly what they needed, a chance to reconnect with each other and remember why they fell in love in the first place. By the time they returned to the city, both Ethan and Clara felt renewed. They weren't naive enough to think their problems had vanished. They still had battles ahead, but they faced them with fresh determination. Mia's recovery continued to progress, giving them hope that brighter days were on the horizon. And, as they settled back into their routines, they carried with them the lessons they'd learned during those tough months. That love required sacrifice, patience, and unwavering support. Of course, life didn't stop throwing challenges their way. Rumors about their relationship persisted, fueled by tabloids eager to sensationalize every detail. Some articles painted Clara as opportunistic, while others questioned whether Ethan was losing focus on his career. At times, the scrutiny wore on them, making it hard to ignore the negativity. But they refused to let it define them. Instead, they leaned on each other, finding humor in the absurd headlines and strength in their shared resilience. One afternoon, while flipping through a magazine at a cafe, Ethan stumbled upon yet another article about them. The headline read something ridiculous about the billionaire and the waitress. He rolled his eyes, tossing the magazine aside. When Clara joined him a few minutes later, she noticed his amused smirk. "What's so funny?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "Oh, just the latest masterpiece from the gossip mill," he replied dryly. "Apparently we're redefining modern romance." Clara snorted, shaking her head. "Well, if they're going to write about us, at least they're getting the important part right. We are redefining things." Her confidence made Ethan smile. "You're incredible, you know that? And you're impossible," she shot back playfully, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." Despite the ups and downs, Ethan and Clara emerged, stronger from every trial. They had weathered storms that would have torn apart lesser relationships, proving to themselves, and to everyone watching, that love wasn't about avoiding hardships. It was about facing them head-on, together. Along the way, they discovered that true happiness wasn't found in perfection. It was found in the messy, beautiful moments they shared, the laughter that followed tears, and the unshakable belief that they were better together than apart. As they stood side by side one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan wrapped an arm around Clara's shoulders. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think I had everything figured out. Success, control, power. They were all I cared about, but now I realize I didn't know anything until I met you." Clara rested her head against his chest, smiling. "And I thought my life was fine the way it was. Turns out I didn't know what I was missing either. Together they watched the last rays of sunlight fade, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it as a team. Because love, they had learned, wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trusting each other enough to figure it out along the way. Months turned into a year, and Ethan and Clara's lives began to settle into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. The chaos of the past, the hospital visits, the media frenzy, the doubts, had started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of stability. It wasn't perfect, of course, life never was. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they woke up each day with a shared purpose, to build something meaningful together. Mia's recovery was progressing steadily thanks to the treatments and surgeries she had undergone. She was still fragile, but her spirit remained unbreakable. A trait Clara often joked she must have inherited from their late parents. Watching Mia grow stronger gave Clara a renewed sense of hope. It also reminded her how grateful she was to have Ethan by her side. Without his unwavering support, she wasn't sure she could have gotten through those dark days. Ethan, too, felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Clara, but for the way she had changed him. He no longer measured success by numbers on a spreadsheet or headlines in the business section. Instead, he found fulfillment in smaller, quieter victories. Seeing Mia smile after a good checkup, hearing Clara laugh during one of their lazy Sunday mornings, or simply holding her hand as they walked through the park. These moments may not have made headlines, but to Ethan, they meant everything. One evening, as they sat together on Clara's apartment balcony, Ethan turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember the first night we met?" asked, his voice soft. Clara smiled, leaning back in her chair. "How could I forget? You looked so out of place in that bar." "I was out of place," he admitted with a chuckle. "But meeting you, it changed everything." Her smile softened and she reached over to take his hand. "It changed me too, you know. Before you, I thought my life was fine the way it was. But now I can't imagine it without you." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his gaze steady. "Then let's make it official." Clara blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he prepared to say the words he'd been thinking about for weeks. "I mean, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Marry me, Clara." For a moment, there was silence. The city hummed softly in the background, the distant sound of traffic blending with the rustle of leaves in the cool night air. Clara stared at him, her green eyes wide with shock, and then slowly a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Of course, yes." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him as he pulled her into a tight embrace. They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the enormity of the moment sink in. This was it, the next chapter of their story, one they would write together. Planning the wedding wasn't easy, especially given the attention their relationship continued to attract. Reporters camped outside their building, eager for any scrap of information about the upcoming ceremony. Invitations were leaked online within hours of being sent, and speculation ran wild about everything from the guest list to the cake flavor. But Ethan and Clara refused to let the chaos overshadow their joy. They kept things simple, focusing on what truly mattered, celebrating their love with the people who mattered most. The ceremony took place on a quiet beach at sunset, far away from the prying eyes of the media. Close friends and family gathered around them, including Mia, who looked radiant in a bright yellow dress. Clara wore a simple white gown, her hair loose around her shoulders, while Ethan opted for a classic suit paired with a nervous grin. As they stood hand in hand beneath an arch of flowers, surrounded by the sound of waves crashing against the shore, neither of them could stop smiling. The officiant's words were heartfelt and personal, reflecting the journey Ethan and Clara had traveled to get here. When it came time for vows, Ethan spoke from the heart, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Clara," he began, looking into her eyes, "you saved me in ways I didn't even know I needed saving. You taught me that love isn't about control or perfection. It's about showing up even when it's hard. And every day I choose to show up for you, to stand beside you, to laugh with you, to face whatever comes our way, together. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks as she responded, her voice strong despite the emotion choking her words. Ethan, you've shown me that love isn't about fairy tales or grand gestures. It's about the little things, the way you listen, the way you care, the way you believe in me even when I doubt myself. I promise to stand by your side, to support you, to remind you every single day how amazing you are, because loving you is the easiest choice I've ever made. As they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss, the small crowd erupted into applause. Fireworks lit up the sky, casting a golden glow over the beach. For Ethan and Clara, it was a moment frozen in time, a celebration of not just their love, but of the resilience and trust that had brought them here. Life after the wedding was a blend of old routines and new beginnings. Ethan officially stepped down as CEO of his company, though he remained involved as a consultant and board member. This allowed him to focus more on the things that truly mattered, spending time with Clara, supporting Mia, and exploring passions he'd long neglected. He even started learning to paint, inspired by the murals Clara loved so much. His early attempts were laughably bad, but Clara encouraged him anyway, framing one of his abstract pieces and hanging it proudly in their living room. Clara, meanwhile, pursued her dream of opening a cafe. With Ethan's help, she found the ABI perfect location, a cozy corner shop near the farmer's market where they'd first bonded. Together, they designed the space to feel warm and welcoming, filling it with mismatched furniture, shelves of secondhand books, and walls adorned with local artwork. On opening day, the line stretched down the block, filled with customers eager to see what Clara had created. As she stood behind the counter, serving coffee and chatting with patrons, Ethan watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. "You did it," he said later that evening, wrapping his arms around her as they cleaned up. "Your dream is real now." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Our dream," she corrected. "None of this would have happened without you." Years passed, and their life together became a tapestry of shared memories. They traveled to places Ethan had once only seen in business meetings, savoring croissants in Paris and wandering ancient streets in Kyoto. They celebrated milestones, Mia graduating high school, Clara's cafe becoming a beloved community, Hub Ethan publishing his first book of paintings, a charity project benefiting underprivileged kids. Through it all, they faced challenges too. Arguments, health scares, moments of doubt. But they always found their way back to each other. Looking back, Ethan couldn't believe how different his life had become. Once a man who avoided love, he now couldn't imagine living without it. Clara had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or accolades. It was measured in moments shared with someone who truly understood you. And for the first time in decades, Ethan felt whole. One evening, as they sat together on the same balcony where he had proposed, Ethan turned to Clara with a contented smile. "You know," he said, "I used to think I didn't need love. That it was just a distraction." Clara raised an eyebrow, teasing him. "And now?" He chuckled, pulling her close. "Now I know it's the only thing that matters." As they gazed out at the city lights twinkling below, Ethan realized something else. Love wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one filled with ups and downs, twists and turns. But as long as he had Clara by his side, he knew they could handle anything. Together, they had built a life that was messy, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. And for Ethan Caldwell, that was enough.